Now let us do the same thing using the reduce method. So what I will do is I will create a new constant. So reduce method. So I'll say const student marks, and I will say student marks out of 100 per subject, and reduce, and this will basically take 3 arguments in the callback function. So the callback function reduce takes the previous value, which will serve as the accumulator, because we will be computing on the same value each time and accumulate the result that we get in this argument. Then we have the second argument, as you can see, which is the current value. So with the current value that you're currently on, so it is the value that you're currently sitting at. Now it also takes some optional arguments like current index, in case if that is required, and optionally it can also take the original array on which you are using the reduce method. So these were the parameters of the callback that is present in the reduce method. And the reduce method can also take one more argument other than the callback function, which is an optional. So let me show you that. It is the initial value. Okay, so it can take an initial value which is optional. Now reduce method now will reduce the array to a single consolidated value. So the second parameter is your initial value, with which you will have to start the reduce operation. Now since we want to get the student total marks first using the reduce method, we'll start with 0. Okay, and this will be a arrow function, and the previous value for our case will be accumulator, which is initially set to 0. So the previous value will initially have this value, which is 0, and we're beginning with that. So accumulator is currently 0, and then we have the current value. So I can define a name for this as subject marks. So I will say subject marks, and then what I can do is, with the current value, which is a subject marks, I will add the previous value which is stored in accumulator. Okay, now let me explain this. So this looks something weird, but we'll understand it bit by bit. Okay, so what is happening here is that since we want to get the student total marks first using the reduce method, we are starting with 0. And what reduce method will do is it will execute the callback function for every value that is there in your student marks out of 100 per subject array. Okay, so it will execute the callback for every value that is there in the array, just like map, and the previous value will be set to initial value. So this is your previous value, which is accumulator, and this will be set to your initial value, which in this case is 0 for the very first iteration if it is set, otherwise it will be set to undefined. Now current value is the first value of the array for the first iteration. So for the very first iteration, the current value will be 56.2. Your previous value, which is the accumulator, will be 0. So 0 plus 56.2 will give you 56.2. Okay, so this way we will progress, and we will gradually accumulate the values and will get the consolidated value in the end. So current value is your first value of the array for the first iteration, and inside the callback function you have to return your currently reduced value. So here we are returning the currently reduced value. Okay, but this is not the final value because we haven't seen the complete array till now. So this will work for the entire array, and once this result is done, we'll finally get the consolidated value. So which in this case, as you can see, is accumulator plus subject marks, and then for each iteration moving forward we will have other current values of the array. So next we will have 98.8, and the previous total was 56.2 because we added that 0 with 56.2, we got 56.2. Then 56.2 will get added to this, then 67.2, which is the current value, will get added to the total of these two elements. Then 33.4 will get added to the total of these 3 elements. Okay, now we are gradually growing the accumulator from left to right. So in the very first iteration, accumulator is 0. In the next iteration, accumulator will be 56.2 and the current value will be this. In the next iteration, accumulator will be the sum of these two values and the current value will be this. And so on, you are moving forward till you get the final value in form of student marks. So this is how the reduce method actually works. So now for the second execution, we will be at the value 98.8. And now the accumulator, which is the previous value, will now not be 0, but instead the value that you returned in the previous iteration, which is 56.2 plus 0. Or you can say accumulator, which is 0, plus the current value 56.2. This was the previous value for the current iteration. So now you will have the value 56.2 as the previous value, the current value, which is the subject marks, is 98.8, and then you will return the sum of this so that this can be utilized in the next iteration when you finally get to the current value of 67.2. Okay. So this is how the reduce method actually functions. So what I will now do is I will log the student marks, or let me name it as student total marks, to the console. So I will log student total marks to the console, and back in the browser you can see the output as 400, which is again the very same output that we got using the for each method. Now what I now want to do is I want to get the percentage obtained. So I'll copy this line of code, which is at line number 154, and paste it on 164. Change the name to percentage obtained, and I will log the percentage obtained to the console. So, and change this to student total marks because we are getting the total marks using the reduce method. So back in my browser, you get the same result, which is 66.66%.